It is not usual in his country to worship heroes fervently, but every Dutch man or woman knows this man's name. He didn't spare himself searching for the Northeast Passage to India and China, striving for his aim bravely and persistently and involving others. The Dutch navigator's name was Willem Barentsz. He was born in 1550. His parents weren't noble by birth and didn't have a surname. Willem was called Barentzoon, that is, Barents' son. The family lived on the Dutch island Terschelling, and the boy grew fond of the sea in his childhood. The outstanding mathematician, geographer, and theologian Peter Plancius became Barents' teacher. He taught Willem to make maps and use instruments of navigation. The youth took to sea with his tutor. Plancius helped Willem Barents prepare the work called The New Description and Atlas of the Mediterranean Sea. One section of the book dealt with the art of navigation and making maps. In the 16th century, the Netherlands became a leading sea state and aimed to establish trade relations with China and India, which were rich in silk, tea, incense, ivory, and gold. But the routes to east through the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean were controlled by the English, Portuguese, and Spanish. The only alternative was to find a passage around the northern coast of Europe and Asia. Peter Plancius, Barents' teacher, became the inspiring force behind the northern expeditions. The Netherlands made 3 attempts to surmount the Arctic. Willem Barentsz commanded one of the ships. In 1594, he followed the western coast of Novaya Zemlya. On one of the islands, the sailors found 2 crosses, proving that Russian coast dwellers visited these places. But the icebound sea didn't allow them to continue the voyage. The second attempt was made a year later. This time, 45-year-old Willem Barents was the chief navigator of the expedition and commanded one of the 7 ships. The fleet intended to go east, not far from the coast, but they were stalled by the ice near Voyage Island as early as in August. The decks and the mast were covered with ice, and it was nearly impossible to set sails. The captains of 6 ships decided to return home, and only Barents objected, but then he obeyed the opinion of the majority. The Dutch government abandoned further searches for the Northeast Passage, though they set a reward for the man who would find this route. Some merchants decided to finance the search. They equipped 2 ships that left Amsterdam on the 18th of May, 1596. The 46-year-old navigator Willem Barents was a member of the 3rd expedition, which set out to search for the Northeast Passage to China. Barents was known as a man who was ready to do everything in his power to achieve his aim, but the merchants didn't want to risk their freight and appointed him the navigator, not giving him the post of the captain. Barents led the fleet northeast. A month later, the sailors discovered the islands where the mountains, covered with ice, rose from the water. The archipelago was called Spitsbergen, that is, mountains with sharp peaks. One ship stayed to investigate it, and on the second ship, the tireless Barents and his crew, consisting of 17 sailors, went to Novaya Zemlya and reached its northern extremity in August 1596. Barents called it Cape Zinlandia because he hoped to see the water free of ice. But suddenly the patrol sailor cried, "I see swans on the sea." Those were the first pieces of ice. Soon the sea began to freeze before the sailors' eyes, and the ship was trapped in ice. The crack of the planking aroused terror. The travelers went ashore in the icy harbor. Europeans wintered in the Arctic for the first time. Their winter stay lasted for 10 months. The sailors built a wintering lodge using boards from their ship and called it the safe house. But the stocks of bread, corned beef, and wine weren't big. Besides, hungry polar bears stole their food and attacked people. The sailors didn't have warm clothes. They had to winter in European clothes and wooden clogs. The fire in the lodge was kept up continuously. Gerrit de Veer, who participated in that winter stay, wrote, "You are sitting near the fire so closely that the soles of your boots begin to char, but your back freezes and covers with frost. But Willem Barentsz remained energetic and cheerful. In difficult times, everyone went to him with any questions. He helped the winterers to keep their spirits up. So as not to lose the count of time, the sailors carefully wound the watch till it froze. The winterers weren't cast down. They played hockey, golf, reread books. The explorers of the Arctic who followed the Dutch adopted many means of fighting with cold, hunger, and depression which the Dutch invented. With the setting of the polar summer, the hope for a speedy rescue appeared. But many sailors had the scurvy, and Barentz's condition was the most serious. He was so weak that he had to be carried to a boat. Willem Barentsz, the life and the soul of the expedition, bore a long polar winter, but died 6 days after leaving the place of the winter stay on the 20th of June, 1597. Barentz's voyage became the last Dutch expedition sent to search for the Northeast Passage from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The body of the brave captain was taken by the sea that was named Barents Sea 250 years later.